The 9,917th meeting of the Security Council is called to order. The provisional agenda for this meeting is protection of civilians in armed conflict. The agenda is adopted. In accordance with Rule 37 of the Council's Provisional Rules of Procedure, I invite the representatives of Cyprus, Iraq, Israel, Kuwait, and Turkey to participate in this meeting. It is so decided. In accordance with Rule 39 of the Council's Provisional Rules of Procedure, I invite the following briefers to participate in this meeting. Mr. Khaled Khiari, Assistant Secretary General for the Middle East, Asia and the Pacific, Departments of Political and Peace-Building Affairs and Peace Operation. Mr. Sung-Ui Lee, Chief Director of the Korean War Abductees Families Union. And Mr. Ruby Chen, father of Itai Chen. It is so decided. The Security Council will now begin its consideration of item 2 of the agenda. I now give the floor to Mr. Khaled Khiari, please.
Mr. President, thank you for the opportunity to brief the Security Council on this important issue. Since the adoption of the Security Council Resolution 2474 in 2019, the number of people affected by armed conflicts, including those reported missing in this context, has only continued to increase. In 2024 alone, the ICRC registered 56,000 new cases of missing persons. There is no comprehensive figure for those missing in conflict, but we know enough that the situation is dire. International humanitarian law, as it relates to missing persons, prohibits enforced disappearance and requires parties to conflict to take all feasible measures to account for those reported missing, while also enshrining the rights of families to get information about the fate of missing kin. This issue is a pressing one among many current situations across the world. The ongoing hostilities between Israel and Palestinian armed groups continue to generate grave concerns under Security Council Resolution 2474. We welcome the recent release of Edan Alexander, an American-Israeli national who had been held hostage in Gaza. This is a source of hope. I echo the Secretary General's words of profound relief that Mr. Alexander was able to return to his family and loved ones after this harrowing ordeal. However, many more remain missing. An estimated 58 Israeli hostages, 35 of them presumed dead, still remain unaccounted for in Gaza. Despite repeated calls by the United Nations and the International Committee of the Red Cross, no credible information has been provided on the condition or whereabouts of the hostages. Access by impartial humanitarian actors has also been denied. Their families still seeking information about their fate and whereabouts. In addition, Israel continues to withhold the remains of deceased Palestinians, including individuals reportedly buried in unmarked or numbered graves, hindering families' access to information and closure. Serious concern also persists regarding thousands of Palestinians detained by Israeli authorities since October 2023, many of whom remain unaccounted for. In Ukraine, following Russia's full-scale invasion in 2022, OHCHR reports that large numbers of Ukrainian civilians in areas under Russian occupation have faced detention, with some of them reportedly held incommunicado. According to OHCHR, some of these cases may amount to enforced disappearances. An unspecified number of Ukrainian civilians, including Ukrainian children, have also been reportedly transferred to the Russian Federation. We welcome the recent exchanges of prisoners of war and exchanges of mortal remains and encourage the sides to step up the frequency, scope, and scale of such exchanges and step up efforts to enable the safe return of Ukrainian children to their families. In Myanmar, instances of individuals believed to be missing or disappeared have risen throughout the country since the 2021 military takeover. At least 2,000 people have reportedly died while in military custody. A key concern remains the lack of access to legal counsel and due process for some people detained arbitrarily, including members of the elected civilian government. Families of many of those that have gone missing in conflicts in years and decades past have yet to learn of the whereabouts of their loved ones. On the Korean Peninsula, we encourage all parties to build on previous efforts and continue the repatriation of remains from the Korean War to their respective countries. In Syria, the missing persons crisis has been a tragically defining feature of the conflict. Syrian families have made it clear that clarifying the fate of all the missing, regardless of who they are and why they disappeared, is essential to transitional justice and sustainable peace. Given the scale and complexity of the challenge, we need a collective effort. It has to be nationally led and internationally supported. The UN welcomes the commitment of the Syrian interim authorities and urges them to work closely with the independent institution on missing persons in the Arab Republic of Syria. Mr. President, disappearances of loved ones create long-term trauma on families and communities. Providing answers for the families of the missing can take decades. For example, the human cost of the 1991 Gulf War still lingers, with 315 Kuwaiti and third country nationals missing to this day. The work of the Committee on Missing Persons in Cyprus illustrates how the issue of missing persons remain important, not only for the families directly affected, but for the whole communities decades after the facts. This is clearly not unique to Cyprus. What is more unique is the continuous support of the authorities, which was reaffirmed publicly by both Cypriot leaders in April, and the existing good cooperation from both sides when it comes to the work of the committee built over time. These, together with the strong professional capacity of the bicommunal teams working in the field or in the laboratory, are the key ingredients for success. Success that also helps to build conducive conditions for the peaceful settlement of the Cyprus issue. Mr. President, when the issue of missing persons is left unaddressed, not only individuals, but entire societies are unable to move on. This can perpetuate distrust and resentment and become an obstacle to sustainable peace. Goodwill, perseverance, and strong international support are crucial elements in the search for missing persons. So is respect for international law. Resolution 2474 must be fully implemented with urgency. The United Nations remain committed to assist all concerned parties, including through the use of the Secretary General's good offices. Thank you, Mr. President.
I thank Mr. Khiari for his briefing. And now I give the floor to Mrs. Sung Eui Lee, please.
For 75 years, I've been waiting for my father to come back. Hello, everyone. My name is Sung Eui Lee, Chief Director of Korean War Abductees Family Union. I'm honored and privileged to be here at the Security Council, which decided to send the UN troops to Korean War to save us. And today, I'm here to share my father's story, who was forcibly taken to North Korea during the Korean War, hoping you could help us again, the victims of the war. First, let me take a few minutes to discuss the importance of UN Security Council Resolution 2474. Though this resolution has passed recently, long after my father was abducted, it created a legal or moral framework that compels the international community to account for the fate of those who are missing. This resolution finally offers a means for our families to voice the sorrow we face every day and seek remedy and resolution from this Council. With that said, I would like to introduce our organization, Korean War Abductees Family Union. It was started in the middle of war in 1951 by the wives of the abductees, and it lasted until 1960s. During the first period, it conducted campaigns to rescue the abductees and made a list of abductees for 3 times, including the English version, sent to the United Nations Command. After long hibernation of 40 years, it was revived by the descendants of the abductees in 2000. Since then, we found 11 hidden lists out of 12, which was known to exist. And also, we found some significant documents proving the fact of abduction from Russia, China, and North Korea. Despite all the efforts we've made since the first period of it and up to now, we still are waiting for and missing our loved ones, not knowing where they are or how they have been. This is the picture of my father, Jong Young Lee, wearing court robes when he served as a prosecutor in 1940s. And this is my father and mother together. My father, Jong Young Lee, was a 42-year-old attorney at that time, a loving father with 7 children and a husband, and was forcibly and plannedly taken by North Korean regime. I am his youngest, only 18 months old then, having no memory of him, wondering what it would be like having a father in my entire life. Lost the breadwinner in the family as a traditional woman with no education, my mother had to go through severe years to keep the family surviving like many other abductees' families, with never-ending bruise in her heart. In spite of all the clear evidences, including the living witnesses like ourselves, the DPRK has never admitted their abduction crime. This is an ongoing crime, the first and the largest case of enforced disappearance. If this case was probably resolved at that time of occurrence, the subsequent kidnapping crimes committed in many other countries like Japan, Thailand, and Romania could have been prevented. This is why the issue of Korean War abductees must be resolved first, because it is the first, the largest, and the most clearly evidenced case with almost 100,000 victims, and the key to resolve the following cases. Thus, we, the families of wartime abduction victims, have this to say to the government, the international community, and the United Nations, especially the Security Council. First, please let the DPRK confirm the life and death and repatriate the victims or even their remains if they have already passed away. Second, please actively seek practical measures to hold the accountability of North Korea, such as filing a complaint with the ICC to determine their responsibility or with any other practical means possible. Third, please establish the truth of incident and restore the honor of the victims of wartime abduction. And do not fail to use Resolution 2474 to hold those responsible accountable and to highlight our cases. Time is running short. Many of our siblings and spouses of the abductees have already passed away, and their children like us are getting very old. We feel that there's not much time left. Sadly enough, we share this grief with many other victims like the post-war abductees, detainees, and POWs and their families. Based on the resolution 2474, I strongly urge the DPRK to confirm our loved ones' whereabouts and repatriations. Family is one of the most fundamental values for human beings made to be together, and abduction, a crime in forced disappearance, is a serious crime against humanity that produces ongoing tragedy. I honestly plead to all of you, not only to our government and the DPRK, but also to the international community, including the United Nations Security Council. Please step forward to secure the human right to be together as a family. I sincerely believe that Security Council will be at the front and take this issue a priority to be solved. In conclusion, I would like to read a poem written by an unknown abductee found in Pyongyang prison in 1951. Oh, my country, oh, United Nations, freedom, you are an immortal phoenix, leaving out homeland behind, an iron-curtained inferno. We are dragged towards a hellish death. Oh, my country, oh, United Nations, that you will deliver us from this hell, this death. We have faith. Thank you for listening.
I thank Mrs. Lee for her briefing. I now give the floor to Mr. Ruby Chen.
Thank you. Before starting, I'd just like to thank Mrs. Lee for coming. We briefly talked beforehand. I used to work in Korea. I've heard of many tragedies like Mrs. Lee, and I think it just comes to show that this is a universal issue and we all have the same pain. So thank you, Mrs. Lee, for coming in and talking to us. Good afternoon, Security Council members. Thank you, Mr. President, for the opportunity to brief you on this important topic. Thank you to the United States, the United Kingdom, France for calling for this meeting and inviting me to brief, as my son is one of the 4 U.S. hostages still in Gaza. I am the father of Itai Chen. Itai is an American, German, Israeli citizen held in Gaza by Hamas for 587 days. If you look at the kid, he's a fun-loving kid. Didn't have much to care about. Loved basketball. Would have been watching a basketball game, the NBA, yesterday. Boy Scout counselor, has a loving girlfriend, 2 siblings. I'm here with my wife, Hagit Chen, a German Israeli citizen, and my youngest son, alone. Itai, at the age of 18, joined the IDF, and on that fatal October 7th, 2023, was stationed on the Israeli-Gaza border. He and his squad fought against Hamas for several hours, protecting Israeli civilians from being raped, burned alive, killed. Eventually, Itai's tank was neutralized by Hamas, and 3 of the 4 tank members were taken hostage to Gaza. Since then, my family, as well as 250 other families, whose loved ones were taken hostage by Hamas and the Islamic Jihad, from over 25 25 different nationalities and 5 different religions have been fighting to receive knowledge of their loved ones and their fate and their release. In March 24, my family was notified by the IDF that Itai most likely did not survive the October 7th attack. But for over 19 months, Hamas have not been willing to acknowledge, A, that he is in their possession, and B, what is his physical status. I think this is the lowest form of terrorist psychological warfare imaginable. I humbly ask the Security Council members, what kind of human beings take deceased people and use them as negotiation chips? Who denies the deceased the last basic human dignity that they deserve? When my family has been subjected to this deliberate withholding of information about our son's faith, the refusal to return him back to us, the silence, that long silence, has been a form of slow, enduring psychological torture. Please look at my son, 14 years old. Where should he be now? Should be at school. But instead he's here with me, fighting for getting his elder sibling back. That's not normal. The UN Special Rapporteur of Torture, Dr. Alice Edwards, has recognized that families of hostages may themselves be victims of torture. She states that the prolonged uncertainty, the denial of truth, the concealment of faith, all of these can constitute inhuman and degrading treatment. That, my dear council members, is our daily reality with no relief in sight. Today, more than 30 families in Israel share the same fate as us. I would like to recognize Leah Golden, sitting behind me, mother of Hadar Golden. She has been advocating for 10 and a half years to receive her son's release from Hamas and was instrumental in the adoption of Resolution 2474. Thank you, Leah, for being with us today. Resolution 2474 was adopted unanimously by all 15 members of the UN Security Council in June 2019, led by Kuwait, that will be speaking here. The resolution marked a historical step in global humanitarian law by officially recognizing the rights of families to know the fate of the missing loved ones in areas of conflict. Resolution 2474 obligates parties, state and non-state actors such as Hamas, in armed conflict to search for and account for the missing. Hamas, by refusing to provide information or access to hostages, even to peacemaking entities such as the International Committee of the Red Cross, are in clear violation of this resolution and of international law. The resolution supports mechanisms to hold parties legally accountable for abduction and kidnapping, including when such actions rise to the level of war crimes and crimes against humanity. The systematic concealment of hostages by Hamas meets this threshold. Resolution 2474 gives the UN and its members a legal, but even more so, a moral framework to condemn Hamas for its actions and to sanction its backers, such as Iran. The Security Council should demand, first and foremost, the release of the deceased hostages in their possession. Furthermore, this violation frames the issue of deceased hostages held by Hamas not just as a political or military issue, but as a violation of international law under a UN Security Council resolution. We are asking, begging, expecting the UN to uphold the very resolution it passed, to implement it with real consequences. There must be accountability for those who withhold the deceased and those that deprive families of the right to closure. Resolution 2474 must not remain symbolic. It must become enforceable. I would also like to bring attention to the religious dimension behind Resolution 2474. The resolution basis is something simple. All of you sitting here today, we are all children of God. We walk this planet together. And as such, there are basic principles all people should adhere to as people of faith. And I'd like to take this opportunity to thank Pope Leo XIV, that in his first Sunday speech called for the release of all the hostages in Gaza and the ceasefire. It is discouraging for the deceased hostage families that this resolution has not been implemented due to politics, and has created an equation that taking hostages, even deceased hostages, is an asset, not a liability. There is a structural gap in the international system that must be resolved. Despite the adoption of Resolution 2474, there is currently no specific mandate within the United Nations dedicated to addressing hostage-taking as a distinct violation of international law. This omission leaves families like ours without a vocal point, without guidance, and without adequate representation. That is why we are calling on this Council and the Secretary General to establish a dedicated UN mandate holder, a special representative or special envoy for hostage affairs, similar to the US that has a special president envoy for hostage affairs that is called SPIHA. Tasked with monitoring the implementation and resolution of 2474 and addressing the broader range of violations and harms associated with hostage-taking, such a mandate holder would provide institutional leadership, coordinate international responses, and assurance that the commitments this Council has made are translated into real actions, relief and justice for the victims and their families. To summarize, my wife and I come here today as parents, like any other parent on this planet. Similar to Orna and Ronen Neutra, here in the audience today, whose son Omer, like Itai, a US citizen, is being held by Hamas. Like Iris Weinstein, daughter of Judy and Gadi Weinstein, US citizens, also held by Hamas. Due to a lack of a better term, we, the US hostage families and the 54 other families with hostages in Gaza, are collateral damage. Yeah, collateral damage is the best thing I got in a conflict that has been going on for decades. We want Itai back, and his physical status, whatever it might be, does not make him any less of a hostage. I ask the Council to reflect on the leadership of President Trump that has demanded, again and again, the release of all hostages in Gaza, the living and the deceased. Since his inauguration, 46 US citizens have been released from captivity worldwide. But his work, like this Security Council, is not done. We ask the Council, in the name of the deceased, whom do not have a voice, to immediately enforce Resolution 2474 with sanctions for those who disobey them. Furthermore, and lastly, in light of the negotiations going on in Doha about a potential ceasefire in Gaza, we also cannot allow a reality where there will be a new UN resolution declaring an end of violence in Gaza without the release of the last hostage. That is hostage number 58. 58 hostages are still in Gaza, deceased or living. Thank you for your time and attention, and I request your support to enable families of this tragic fate, wherever you might be living, such as mine, to have closure and then have at least the ability to move on to the next sad chapter in life, as we say, I have been saying for 587 days, bring them home now. Thank you for your attention.
I thank Mr. Chen for his briefing. I now give the floor to those council members who wish to make statements. I give the floor to the representative of the United States.
Thank you, Mr. President. And thank you, Assistant Secretary Khaled Khiari. And thank you, Mrs. Sang-Yu Lee and Mr. Ruby Chen, for your courage in addressing the Council in such a compelling way today. To the Chen and Lee families, on behalf of the American people, I extend condolences for your losses, and my heart goes out to you both, as we also stand with other families the world over who have had to grapple with this hardship, unsure where their loved ones are, whether they are alive, whether they will be able to dignify their remains with a proper burial. Almost 6 years ago, the Security Council addressed this injustice, adopting its first ever resolution on persons reported missing during armed conflict, with the sponsorship of over 60 member states. With Resolution 2474, the Council spoke as one voice, urging parties in armed conflict to search for those reported missing and return the remains of those deceased. But parties to armed conflict have fallen tragically short in implementing Resolution 2474 since its adoption. The bereaved families feel this failure each day in the form of absence and unresolved grief. For them, that failure is persistent and palpable. Today, that failure is staring us in the face. Just today, I met with Dr. Leah Golden, who has been a tireless advocate, including before this council, on behalf of all those, living and deceased, who have gone missing in conflict and who have been held cruelly by their captors as bargaining chips. Dr. Golden has advocated in particular for her son, Lieutenant Hadar Golden, who, along with another soldier, Oron Shaul, was killed and abducted by Hamas terrorists on August 1st, 2014. She said, and I quote, "This very institution that brokered the ceasefire under which Hadar Golden was killed by Hamas and held captive for the past 10 plus years has yet to uphold its own responsibility to correct the injustice that followed and implement Resolution 2474 to bring Hadar Golden home." Close quote. Colleagues, we have an opportunity to right these wrongs and bring solace to grieving families. The Council should take an unflinching look at the impact of failing to hold Hamas, a brutal terrorist organization, to account. Hamas murdered Itai Chen and 1,200 others on October 7th, 2023, and now denies their families the chance to bury their remains and have a degree of closure. We call on Hamas to immediately return the remains of Americans Itai Chen, Gadi Hagi, Judy Weinstein Hagi, and Omer Nutra, and every other hostage killed or murdered. Return them to their families now. Allow the families to mourn. They deserve closure. Thankfully, Aidan Alexander has returned home after 583 days in Hamas captivity due to the efforts of President Trump and others. But the United States will not remain silent about the plight of all hostages ripped from their families. Nor will we relent until their families are reunited with their loved ones. We once again demand Hamas immediately release all hostages. Hamas must return the remaining 58 hostages, including those brutally murdered in captivity. This council will be judged by what we do to bring them home. In addition to recognizing Dr. Leah Golden, who played a key role in pushing the council to address this issue, and Ruby Chen, who suggested that this meeting take place today, I would also like to again thank Ms. Lee and all of the family members of abductees for your continued advocacy on behalf of your loved ones and all who share this fate. The Korean War Abductees Family Union and organizations like it play a critical role in holding the DPRK to account for its abuses. The DPRK is among the most repressive, authoritarian states in the world. Its human rights situation is deplorable. The United States remains committed to the immediate resolution of abductees, detainees, and unrepatriated prisoners of war. Rather than shield the DPRK regime from scrutiny, responsible council members should use their influence to return those abducted or their remains to their families. We renew the call for all parties in armed conflict to return the remains of victims like Chen and actively search for those reported missing. And I would include here U.S. citizens Paul Overby in Afghanistan and Austin Tice and Majen Kamalmaz in Syria. Our commitment to all U.S. nationals wrongfully detained or held hostage is reflected in the Levinson Act, named after Robert Levinson, whose family has waited almost 2 decades for the return of his remains from Iran. The United States will continue to push for the return of all U.S. citizens unjustly held abroad. Mr. President, we urge all member states to fully implement Resolution 2474 and end impunity for Hamas, the DPRK, and all other parties to armed conflict who continue to flout it. I thank you.
I thank the representative of the United States for a statement. I give the floor to the permanent representative of the United Kingdom.
Thank you, President. And I'd like to start by thanking the briefers for their powerful and moving testimony and your tireless advocacy. President, I'd like to make 3 points. First, as we've heard, the impact of those missing in conflict is lasting and devastating, with families forced to live without knowledge of the fate of their loved ones. As we've heard, the ICRC registered 56,000 new cases of missing persons in 2024 alone. The United Kingdom supported the adoption of UN Security Council Resolution 2474. This requires parties to armed conflict to help reunite and reconnect separated families, to collect and protect information on missing persons, and to return remains to relatives. Yet in too many cases, these requirements have not been fulfilled. As Ms. Lee made clear, despite decades passing, DPRK has still not shared information about those it abducted with their families. It is critical that all parties and stakeholders comply with Resolution 2474 and IHL provisions, and that the ICRC and relevant actors are granted access to information on persons reported missing and to those detained or taken hostage. Second, conflicts around the world continue to tear people away from their loved ones. This includes in Ukraine, where thousands remain missing, including tens of thousands of children forcibly deported to Russia. In Syria, over 130,000 people remain missing, and we welcome the new Syrian government's commitment to establish a national commission to clarify their fate. Third, I want also to highlight the unimaginable ordeal faced by hostages held by Hamas. This council has heard firsthand from former hostages Eli Sharabi and Noah Argamani of the cruel and dehumanizing treatment they were subjected to. Hamas must be held accountable for its despicable actions. We welcome the release of Eden Alexander, who was reunited with his family this week. But as we heard from Mr. Chen today, many more families continue to wait in agony. This also includes the families of Avinatan Orr, Yossi Sharabi, and Shay Levinson, who have strong links to the UK. President, a ceasefire in Gaza is the best way to bring the hostages home, end the suffering of Palestinians, and bring us back to much-needed peace. Far too many have lost their lives and been torn away from their families. No one should have to suffer this fate, whether in Gaza or elsewhere in the world. It is time for the spirit of SCR 2474 to be realised for the sake of all those who remain missing. I thank you.
I thank the Permanent Representative of the United Kingdom for a statement. I give the floor to the representative of Denmark.
Thank you. Mr. President, let me commence by thanking ASG Khiari for his briefing and Mr. Ruby Chen and Ms. Sung Lee for their powerful and heartbreaking testimonies. Denmark stands in empathy with every person who still mourns or searches for loved ones lost in conflicts around the globe. Mr. President, after 19 months in Hamas's captivity, Israeli-American hostage Eden Alexander was released earlier this week. We extend our heartfelt wishes to Eden and his family, and we urge this positive momentum to continue. We continue to condemn the brutal terrorist attack on October 7th and the ruthless hostage-taking by Hamas. The remaining hostages in Gaza must be freed. The suffering must end for the hostages and for their families. And so must the suffering of over 2 million civilians in Gaza who are at high risk of famine. The Israeli humanitarian blockade on Gaza must be lifted. We also stress that the ICRC must be allowed access to the hostages in Gaza, and the same goes for those held without charge in administrative detention centers in Israel. Mr. President, as of 2024, the ICRC is tracing open cases for more than 255,000, so many it's unbelievable, missing people worldwide, from Ukraine and Iraq to Sudan, to South Sudan and the Democratic Republic of the Congo. The figures stagger our conscience. As we have heard in today's personal testimony from Ms. Sung Lee, over 70 years ago, hundreds of thousands of soldiers and civilians were killed and disappeared in the Korean War. And this has led to decades of anguish and trauma which haunts generations of Koreans. Whole families remain unable to find the closure or solace in laying family members to rest. In Syria, we have all witnessed the harrowing crisis of the missing, disappeared, and arbitrarily detained. During 14 years of conflict, ending only with the fall of the Assad regime last December, over 150,000 people were abducted, detained, or forcibly disappeared by regime forces and listed terror groups. The launch of the Independent Institution of Missing Persons in the Syrian Arab Republic is an important step to determine the fate and whereabouts of all missing persons in Syria and to support victims and their families. In Ukraine, the number of open cases revealed by the ICRC when it comes to missing persons are alarming. A recent report published by the Independent International Commission of Inquiry also documented a pattern of systematic failure when it comes to the Russian military communicating the fate or whereabouts of those disappeared in Ukraine. This is deeply troubling. Denmark unequivocally condemns these actions, especially those relating to the forced deportation of children, leaving hundreds of thousands of families in agonizing uncertainty and despair. Mr. President, as outlined in Resolution 2474, military planners must integrate management of the missing, prisoners of war, and the dead into every combat operation. This includes the systematic registration of detainees, prompt information exchange with families, and dignified handling and identification of human remains. We also reiterate that UN staff, humanitarian and medical workers, and journalists enjoy special protection under the law of armed conflict. Their detention or disappearance in the course of their work also chills communities and destroys families. Mr. President, to conclude, as we commemorate the 80th anniversary of the end of the Second World War, we are reminded of the profound role of the ICRC that the ICRC played in tracing and reuniting those separated from families during the war. In Resolution 2474, this Council reasserted the centrality of their work and the role that the ICRC plays in the protection of the missing and arbitrarily detained in conflict. As such, 2474 is an important component when it comes to the protection of civilians' agenda. The faithful implementation of Resolution 2474 in current and future conflict settings can help ease the suffering of families, prisoners, and civilians trapped in conflict, providing a semblance of dignity and hope amidst the chaos and misery of war. Thank you.
I thank the representative of Denmark for her statement. I give the floor to the representative of China.
President, the issue of missing persons constitutes a critical dimension of the item, the protection of civilians in armed conflict. In 2019, the Council unanimously adopted Resolution 2474, reaffirming its unwavering commitment to international humanitarian law and setting out clear requirements for the prevention and resolution of the issue of missing persons. With escalated turbulence on the global stage and rising geopolitical conflicts in recent years, according to the statistics of the International Committee of the Red Cross, more than 56,000 new cases of missing persons were registered globally in 2024, the highest increase in 20 years. And the Resolution 2474 has not been effectively implemented. In addition, in Gaza, the ongoing Israeli offensive and blockade have persisted for 19 months. Over 50,000 Palestinian lives have been lost. Appallingly, mass graves continue to be uncovered. Countless innocent civilians remain buried under the rubble. In the Sudan, armed conflict has displaced over 11.6 million people, with the ICRC alone registering more than 7,700 missing persons. In South Sudan, nearly 100 humanitarian workers have been killed and dozens more remain unaccounted for. In Haiti, rampant gun violence has led to frequently reported cases of missing civilians, particularly women and children. Behind these harrowing facts and staggering figures lie countless heartbreaking stories and shattered families. Wives who've been searching for their missing husbands for decades, mothers digging through ruins with their bare hands, desperately hoping to find their children. The international community must support affected countries in addressing the issue of missing persons and make strenuous efforts to help every scarred family seek answers and find solace. I wish to share 3 observations. First, efforts to address the issue of missing persons must be guided by the international humanitarian law. Any attacks against civilians and humanitarian workers are not acceptable. Parties to conflict bear the responsibility to search for the missing, collect, preserve, and manage relevant information, clarify the whereabouts of the missing to their families, and assist in family reunion. They must also ensure humanitarian access and provide necessary assistance to humanitarian workers. Second, Addressing the issue of missing persons requires a focus on conflict prevention and resolution. As long as wars rage on, the tragedy of missing persons may recur. The Security Council must earnestly fulfill its primary responsibility of maintaining international peace and security by vigorously advancing dialogue and negotiation, promoting peaceful settlement of disputes, and preventing the outbreak of conflict in the first place. Parties to the conflict are obligated to implement Council resolutions, achieve an early ceasefire and cessation of fighting, resolve differences through political negotiations, and ultimately eliminate the root causes of conflict. Third, to resolve the issue of missing persons, greater support must be extended to countries concerned. On the basis of respecting their national sovereignty, the international community needs to engage in information exchange and experience sharing with them, providing targeted assistance to strengthen their national capacities, including the use of advanced technologies to search for, locate, and identify missing persons. We support ICRC and other international organizations in carrying out their work with neutrality, justice, and independence, and in playing their active part in addressing the issues concerned. Lastly, China remains committed to working alongside the international community to advance the implementation of Resolution 2474 and to make unremitting efforts towards resolving the issue of missing persons in armed conflict. I thank you, President.
I thank the representative of China for his statements. I now give the floor to the permanent representative of the Republic of Korea.
Thank you, Mr. President. I thank the US, UK, and France for calling this important meeting. I thank ASG Khiari for his briefing, and I appreciate Ms. Lee Seung-hui and Mr. Ruby Chen for their vivid and poignant testimonies. We have just heard about missing persons in two armed conflicts, one of the oldest wars soon after the establishment of the UN, and the dire conflict that we are witnessing today. Yet, over this 75-year time span, the agony of families and the psychological impact on societies, not knowing the fate and whereabouts of their loved ones, remain the same. Last year, the world saw the highest increase in the number of missing persons in 2 decades, with more than 56,000 new recorded cases. This unprecedented situation largely stems from increasing armed conflicts and the prevalent tendency to disregard obligations under international law. Above all, the existing legal framework for addressing missing persons in armed conflict must be observed. A coherent legal framework to prevent enforced disappearances during armed conflict is already in place. It is firmly grounded in international humanitarian law, international human rights law, and the relevant Security Council resolutions, including Resolution 2474. The Geneva Conventions, in particular, set out clear obligations for parties to conflict to register detainees and prisoners of war, maintain records of the deceased and their burial sites, and facilitate data sharing, which are all essential measures to prevent families from enduring the anguish of uncertainty. Despite this seamless legal framework, the situation on the ground continues to deteriorate. In Syria, an estimated 100,000 to 200,000 persons remain missing. In Sudan, nearly 1,000 cases of enforced disappearance have been reported since April 2023, though the actual number is believed to be significantly higher. At such a critical juncture, inaction amounts to tacit acquiescence. The Security Council should continuously speak with one voice and urge parties to armed conflict to fully comply with their legal obligations. In this regard, we reiterate our strong demand for the release of all hostages taken by Hamas and stress the urgent need to clarify their fate. Mr. President, in order to effectively address the issue of missing persons, multi-layered, innovative approaches should be explored. All concerned states, parties to armed conflict, the United Nations and other international organizations, civil society, media, and the private sector should come together to this end. In this respect, we fully support the continuous cooperation between the Kuwaiti and Iraqi authorities within the framework of the Tripartite Commission to search for, identify, and return the persons who went missing during the Gulf War in 1991. Support from international organizations is also indispensable. The Independent Institution on Missing Persons in Syria, established by the General Assembly in 2023, reflects the need for a central mechanism that serves both as an information hub and a point of engagement for victims and their families. Back at home, the Korean people know how a voluntary initiative led by the media can result in a dramatic outcome. The TV show titled Finding Separated Families in 1983 in Korea, which broadcast live for 140 days, turned out to be a huge, unexpected success. This program reunited 10,000 separated families since the Korean War, who had not even known that their loved ones lived in the same part of the country. This TV program was later inscribed on UNESCO's Memory of the World Register. When the Korean War broke out in 1950, an estimated 100,000 civilians were abducted by North Korea during the 3-year-long conflict. According to the 2014 UNCOI report, the wartime abductions by the North Korean authorities were widespread and organized with the objective of recruiting labor and expertise. This constitutes a large-scale, premeditated, enforced disappearance of civilians, which amounts to crimes against humanity under international law. North Korea not only denies the very fact of the abductions, but has also continued to abduct and detain a significant number of South Korean people and citizens of other countries, including Japan, up until recently. Given the aging of the abductees and their families, this is an urgent matter that can no longer be delayed. My government once again strongly urges North Korea to resolve all issues relating to abductees, detainees, and unrepatriated prisoners of war, including by offering an official apology, verifying the victims' fate, and ensuring their safe and immediate return. Mr. President, in closing, we should be reminded that the ultimate resolution of the missing persons issue lies in conflict prevention and peaceful settlement. We should therefore remember that those who are displaced or have become refugees through conflict today may become missing persons tomorrow. That is why this Council should seek ways to responsibly tackle this vital issue now. Thank you, Mr. President.
I thank the Permanent Representative of the Republic of Korea for his statements. I now give the floor to the representative of Panama.
Muchas gracias, Presidente.
Thank you, President. Panama attaches great importance to the convening of this briefing on the implementation of Resolution 2474, the first adopted by this Council exclusively dedicated to persons reported missing in armed conflicts. Moreover, we are grateful to the briefers for their moving testimony. We stand with them and we support them in their grief. Today, we are called upon to discuss a profoundly human dimension of war, the right of families to know the fate of their loved ones. This right has no statute of limitations. It does not depend on the time, the place, or type of conflict. It is a universal right. Resolution 2474 establishes a clear roadmap, preventing disappearances, registering detainees, actively searching for persons reported missing, protecting remains, and guaranteeing communication with families. This is a legal obligation, but beyond that, it is a moral duty. Persons going missing in the context of armed conflicts not only leaves deep wounds on families, it also tears apart social fabric and undermines the very foundations of a lasting peace. It is a tragedy which perpetuates suffering, hinders reconciliation, and impedes the full restoration of the rule of law. President, Panama underscores that the implementation of this resolution must be universal and consistent. Obligations related to the search for missing persons are clearly enshrined in the Geneva Conventions of 1949 and their additional protocols of 1977 and 2005. These norms are binding for all parties in all conflicts, regardless of the nature of these conflicts and any specific legal provisions. They have no statute of limitations, neither can they be subordinate to political or individual interests. All parties, a state party or not, must do everything possible to clarify the whereabouts of missing persons and offer dignified responses to families, including a long time after hostilities have drawn to a close. Present in the global south, protracted conflicts, military invasions disguised as special operations or just causes, and internal crises financed from outside have left missing persons and uncertainty in their wake. From the communities devastated by war in the Middle East and Africa to the battlefields in Europe and the East and the peoples of Latin America and the Caribbean, thousands of families continue to live in the anguish of having no certainty regarding the whereabouts of their loved ones. The search for those that never return remains an open wound, calling for truth, justice, and reparation. Victims tend to always be the same: peasants, native communities, older adults, women and children. In other words, those that do not take up weapons, but nevertheless they carry the heaviest and cruelest weight of armed conflict. President, Panama is all too well aware of this anguish. The scars of our history, particularly those that resulted from the military invasion of the 20th of December 1989, remain etched on our collective memory and continue to be a source of uncertainty and controversy. It is estimated that between 250 and 500 people lost their lives, and around 100 at least remain missing to date. This reality compels us to recognize that the disappearance of persons in armed conflicts is not only a humanitarian tragedy, rather it is also a symptom of structural inequalities besetting the international system and the symptoms of a geopolitical arena that does not always apply its principles with equal consistency in all contexts. This lack of consistency must end. The universal nature of international humanitarian law cannot continue to remain a promise unfulfilled. For this reason, the search for missing persons must occupy pride of place in peace processes as well as in ceasefires and in all post-conflict reconstruction processes, with no exceptions or conditions attached whatsoever. President, political will cannot remain dead letter in declarations or resolutions. It must convert into tangible action. The search for missing persons requires more than a moral commitment. It demands sufficient resources, specialized technical capacities, adequate institutional infrastructure, and efforts sustained over time. International cooperation is vital to guarantee that states, particularly those with limited resources, receive the necessary support to undertake dignified exhumations, forensic analyses with advanced technology, and the precise identification of human remains, as well as the respectful return of these remains to families affected. Panama believes it of vital importance that states strengthen their national search mechanisms. They must foster mutual cooperation and support regional and international efforts designed to guarantee families' right to know the fate of their loved ones. Within the context of a broader commitment to the protection of human dignity and the right to truth, Panama has also ratified key instruments within the international human rights system. These include the International Convention for the Protection of All Persons from Enforced Disappearance and the Inter-American Convention on Forced Disappearances of Persons. Whilst it is true that these instruments belong to another legal system, they do complement efforts, however, to prevent and eradicate all forms of disappearance, including those that occur outside of armed conflicts. Moreover, Panama reiterates its support for the International Committee of the Red Cross. The committee's impartial and professional work is vital to locate missing persons, protect their families, and effectively implement international humanitarian law. President, Resolution 2474 constitutes a significant step forward on the part of this Council because it recognises and broaches the tragedy of persons reported missing in armed conflicts, but recognising the problem is not enough. While this resolution does remain in force, other crucial endeavours have been paralysed by the use of the veto. This perpetuates conflicts, worsens human suffering, and condemns thousands of families to live in uncertainty without access to truth, justice, and without answers. Panama reiterates that we stand in solidarity with those countries facing conflicts, and as such, we stand in solidarity with those communities affected by persons going missing. We believe that it is only by joining efforts, legislative, judicial, humanitarian, and diplomatic efforts, that we will be able to honour victims and avoid new cases of missing persons remaining unresolved. We continue to support all efforts that make the right of families to obtain timely responses a reality. At the same time, we work to protect human dignity, particularly in the darkest moments of armed conflict. Thank you.
I thank the representative of Panama for his statement. I give the floor to the representative of Algeria.
Thank you, Mr. President. At the outset, we would like to thank Mr. Khaled Khiari for his comprehensive briefing. We have also listened to the briefings from the representatives of civil society. Every missing person has a story, and every story has family members that tell the story with tears in their eyes. This is a tragedy. And when we listen to this tragedy told by mothers and fathers and sons and daughters that are still waiting, languishing, this is a human tragedy that we should sympathize with. It reminds us of the vision of our founding fathers, and they have built this organization on the ashes of world wars so that children do not face guns and wars. Today, we must ask the following question: are we still true to the vision of those who have dreamt of peace? Are we inheriting the inheritors of these principles? Are we able to break the brutal cycle of wars? At the United Nations, at the Security Council, are we able to shoulder this responsibility? And if we are unable to preserve human dignity, which is the precondition of every right, then these United Nations will not live up to its slogan. Mr. President, international humanitarian law gave us a roadmap, and international law addressed every single aspect of life when it comes to missing persons as well, whether through the Geneva Conventions or the different Security Council resolutions that are binding to all, especially Resolution 2474. It was tabled by the state of Kuwait. We also have the presidential statement that was submitted by Algeria last year. Despite all that, the number of missing persons continues to increase, as if we have not learned from the mistakes of the past. In 2024 alone, the ICRC recorded over 56,000 new cases of missing persons in over 120 conflicts 56,000 stories of pain, 56,000 dreams that languish between the heavens and hell. These are families that are living on a hope, the hope that these loved ones will one day come back home. But when we ignore the law and this becomes the rule, then tragedy becomes the normal way of life. And loss starts becoming the policy. Once again, we call on clear, firm, transparent mechanisms that will ensure full compliance with international humanitarian law and will ensure holding accountable all those who violated the law. This is not a choice. This is an obligation. No one is above the law. No one is above accountability. We call for recording the names of those that were deprived of their freedom in the right way, in a correct way, and their families should be informed of their fate. We need to respect the mandate given to the ICRC so that it can carry out its monitoring role in an effective way to guarantee that those who are detained are treated in a humane way, to guarantee that they can contact their families. Furthermore, when there is an armed conflict, we need to record the information related to detainees. We need to look for victims. We need to make sure that human remains are treated with dignity. All parties to the conflict must record all necessary information in order to identify those who were killed, to return human remains to the families. Mr. President, pain should not cause further pain. Suffering does not justify further suffering. Among the 56,000 missing persons that were recorded last year, 11,000 of them were in Gaza. Yes, they were in Gaza. This small, small land, but with great suffering. Gaza alone carried 1/5 of the suffering of our world in 1 year. And those who do not believe that this number is a cry for help, then maybe you should look into your humanity. Any attempt to justify what is happening as this is a lawless land, in that this land is not subject to international law, this should be condemned. For the suffering of the Palestinian people did not come as a result of October 7. This suffering started with the start of the occupation, which continues. This occupation continues to ignore Palestinians, the living and the dead. They are missing in the prisons of the occupation. They are missing because the occupation continues to keep their bodies as hostages. They deny their families the right to get back the bodies of their loved ones so that they can bury them with dignity. The occupation has retained the bodies of 198 Palestinian people who were killed in 2024 alone, not only in Gaza. Therefore, the number of bodies held by Israel amounts to 641 bodies. Not only is this unacceptable, unfortunately, this was legal because the Israeli court issued an order that allows an Israeli military commander to hold the bodies of Palestinians that were killed by the Israeli army and were buried temporarily in order to be used as bargaining papers in the future. Those who have this as a policy should not lecture others, should not give lessons to others, and should not play the victim. Madam President, the absence of loved ones with time becomes invisible obstacles before peace and entrenches hostility. We cannot build trust in a land that's filled with suffering and with open burial grounds. Therefore, respecting the law is a precondition to preserve our humanity. Peace, the dream of all of us, the wish of all of us, could be the only way to avoid wars and to let go of the suffering. I thank you.
I thank the representative of Algeria for the statement, and I give the floor to the permanent representative of France.
Thank you, Madam President. I would like to thank the Assistant Secretary General, Mr. Khiari, for his briefing, and I would like to also thank and pay tribute to Ms. Sung-Yu Lee and Mr. Ruby Chen and to your families. Pay tribute to your courage, your testimony, and to tell you that around this table there are mothers, fathers, brothers and sisters who can identify with what you're living through and express their sympathy with you. Madam President, the international humanitarian law and human rights law places obligations on us, and the grief of the families also places obligations on us, whether they died on the battlefield or forcibly disappeared or POWs. This double obligation led the Council 6 years ago to unanimously adopt Resolution 2474, the first such resolutions on the missing persons in armed conflict. Yes, Mr. Chen, this Council must act to better implement this resolution. First of all, the Council has to continue demanding that parties to a conflict abide by the obligations they are under as a reason because of international law in order to prevent disappearances before, during, and after an armed conflict. These obligations are unconditional and they are not subject to reciprocity requirements. And we are thinking here about Gaza, where we have been calling since the 7th of October 2023 for an immediate and unconditional release of all hostages detained by Hamas and other terrorist groups, including 8 of our compatriots. According to the IDF, 57 hostages are still detained in the enclave. 34 of them have been declared dead. Every effort must be made to enable their release and the repatriation of their remains. And everyone knows how urgent the ceasefire is for the resumption of humanitarian aid and negotiations. This also applies to the context of Russia's war in Ukraine. Thousands of Ukrainian families are waiting for information about their loved ones. 20,000 children have been deported to Russia, according to Ukrainian authorities. The issue of the missing persons is also important for building peace. And here I'm thinking of the case of Kuwait and Argentina, where thousands of families are still waiting for information about their disappeared loved ones for decades. And the United Nations should not forget that. This is also the case for Syria, where we call for truth and justice for about 130,000 people disappeared since 2011. This is a must for the countries to rebuild. We welcome, therefore, the work done by the Independent Institution for the Disappeared in Syria and the civil society organizations and other UN inquiry mechanism, including the International Impartial Independent Mechanism and the International Independent Commission of Inquiry on the Syrian Arab Republic. We call here for the cooperation on the part of the new authorities between them and these mechanisms. Secondly, the Council has to reaffirm the central role placed by the ICRC who have such a mandate under the Geneva Conventions, and the parties of conflict must cooperate with the ICRC, in particular its Central Tracing Agency, and provide them with access to information, places of detention, and the protected persons. We support the role that the ICRC can play so as to facilitate confidence-building measures within the framework of negotiations and peace agreements. We also reiterate our support to the associations of victims and human rights advocates, whose role is distinct and complementary to the ICRC. Third, the international community has to fight against immunity for those who are responsible for forced disappearance by basing ourselves on human rights, which provides an additional protection to international humanitarian law. Under the Rome Statute of the ICC, forced disappearance of people amount to crimes against humanity when they are committed within the framework of a widespread or systematic attack against civilian populations and conducted knowingly. Referring to the ICC remains at the disposal of this Council if and when such crimes are committed. We also recall the central role played by the Convention on Forced Disappearance and call on all states who have not yet ratified it to do so. Madam President, even wars have laws, and the Council must act to ensure that they are abided by, and we are determined to do so. I thank you.
I thank the permanent representative of France for the statement, and I give the floor to the representative of Sierra Leone.
Thank you, Madam President. Sierra Leone thanks the Presidency for convening this important meeting at the request of the United Kingdom, United States, and France. We also thank Assistant Secretary General Khaled Khiari for his sovereign briefing, and we take note of the testimony shared by Mrs. Song Yu Lee and Mr. Ruben Chen. Our thoughts are with you and your loved ones. Sierra Leone remains deeply concerned by the rising number of missing persons in armed conflicts worldwide, now exceeding 254,000 cases as reported by the ICRC and highlighted by the Secretary General's report. This is not just a humanitarian concern. It is a profound human tragedy. Thousands of people are presumed dead or forcibly disappeared. These disappearances are often as a result from abductions, extrajudicial killings, and forced removals. Many victims remain unidentified, and families are left searching for answers and closure, sometimes for decades. According to the ICRC data, active investigations into missing persons have reached alarming levels. Over 130,000 in Syria alone, more than 17,000 in Lebanon, and thousands more across Africa, Southeast Asia, Latin America, and Eastern Europe. In Ukraine, for instance, there has been a significant rise in missing persons, including children forcibly separated from their families. Sierra Leone underscores the importance of strengthening efforts to trace the missing, deliver justice, and restore the right of families to know the fate of their loved ones. We support mechanisms established to address this issue, such as the Independent Institution of Missing Persons in the Syrian Arab Republic, and urge greater cooperation with ICRC and similar humanitarian organizations. Mr. President, we further highlight the long-standing case of missing persons resulting from Iraq's 1990 invasion and occupation of Kuwait. This remains an unresolved humanitarian issue. Despite progress, the fate of many Kuwaiti and third country nationals remains unknown. We recall the relevant Security Council resolutions that have outlined Iraq's responsibility to cooperate in locating missing persons. Sierra Leone joins calls for constituted efforts in fulfilling these obligations in accordance with international humanitarian law and the Security Council decisions. Mr. President, the anguish of missing persons' families, their fear, helplessness, and pain can perpetuate intergenerational trauma and fierce cycles of violence and mistrust. These dynamics hinder reconciliation and peace building. Peace negotiations and traditional justice processes must explicitly integrate measures for addressing missing persons, including trust-seeking, victim support, and memorialization. Resolution 2474 of 2019 remains a milestone in establishing clear obligations on parties to conflict to prevent disappearances, trace the missing, and enable the return of remains. It affirms that protecting civilians and respecting human rights are not optional, but fundamental obligations under international law. Sierra Leone supports practical measures under this resolution, such as proper detainee registration, the establishment of national information bureaus, and training of armed forces on international humanitarian law compliance. The impact of missing persons, in particularly severe for children who are vulnerable to displacement, recruitment, exploitation, and separation from their families. The cause of conflict obstructs tracking and unification of missing children, leaving families in prolonged states of distress. Women and girls are also disproportionately affected, often victims of sexual violence, trafficking, and forced marriages. Many go missing in these circumstances, further deepening the trauma and the destabilization of affected communities. Sierra Leone remains committed to the full implementation of Resolution 2474, the Biennial General Assembly resolution, and broader efforts to prevent and resolve cases of missing persons in conflict.
Statement. I give the floor to the representative of the Russian Federation.
Thank you, Mr. President. We note the contribution made by the briefers into our discussion today. Russia supports all efforts aimed at assisting with the search for missing persons in armed conflict, including Security Council Resolution 2474. Those who have been separated by war should be able to learn of the fate of their loved ones and reunite with them if their loved ones are alive. These obligations are enshrined in the Geneva Conventions and the additional protocols thereto. Russia, in this regard, is one of the most impacted states. Millions of Soviet Union citizens remain missing after World War II. Considerable efforts were made to search for these people, and Red Cross organizations have contributed to that search, but this issue did not become a subject for Security Council consideration. We do not think that a Security Council discussion about some aspects of the aftermath of the Korean War of 70 years ago, we don't think that this helps resolve the current situation on the peninsula. The immediate destabilizing factor in the region still lies in the increased military presence of NATO countries in the Asian and Pacific, and this is systematically destroying the prospects of building a collective security architecture outside of alliances on the peninsula. Mr. President, searching for the missing persons is first and foremost a humanitarian issue, which is of great importance for those who have survived conflicts. At the same time, as any humanitarian activity is, searching for the missing persons has to be conducted in coordination with the affected states and complement their efforts. What we need to do is develop substantive cooperation and provide effective assistance to governments. The international community has all of these instruments at its disposal. A great role in this issue is played by humanitarian organizations, including those which are part of a Red Crescent movement, as well as neutral states conducting mediation. We must recognize that these issues are resolved most effectively when they do not have excessive political attention to them. Unfortunately, the general trend to politicize the international agenda also touched upon this area. Even such an important thing as searching for the missing becomes a tool of political pressure. Also, we see that states see pseudo-assistance imposed of them using various pretexts. This is counterproductive and leads to a deterioration of humanitarian cooperation. This also includes the creation of a number of institutions on the missing, which is being used as part of a political toolkit. Mr. President, Russia, for its part, is making every necessary effort to search for the missing and to restore the family links in the context of the Ukrainian crisis. We're grateful to the International Committee of the Red Cross for their assistance in information exchange here and for the mediation efforts having to do with the repatriation of civilians. The human rights ombudsperson in the Russian Federation, Tatiana Moskalkova, and the children's rights ombudsperson answerable to the President, Ms. Maria Lvova-Belova, and the Russian Red Cross are very closely involved in information exchange with the committee. We would like to express our regret having to do with the fact that the Assistant Secretary General Khiari decided today to repeat the false states from the reports of OHCHR. The presence of this organization is fully under the control of the Kiev authorities, and it is therefore impossible for them to provide objective information. At the same time, unfortunately, Mr. Khiari did not even mention the missing amongst those who are Russian nationals. Unfortunately, this is something that falls directly under the rubric of double standards. We also noted what was said by the United Kingdom, who is constantly talking about 20,000 people abducted without any specific, it's the same figure all the time, without any proof underlying that or any kind of information that could be useful here. At the same time, no one out of those people I mentioned, no one's mentioned the fact that about 2,000 civilians are missing in the Kursk Oblast as a result of the Ukrainian incursion there. As we were liberating some of their territory in March, we found 378 people, and further searches continue. We do know that some of those people is being kept by the Kievan authorities as a human bargaining chips for the purpose of an exchange, as they themselves openly say. Mr. President, we would like to welcome the release by Hamas of Eden Alexandra, the American-Israeli hostage, and all earlier hostages released. And we hoped that this gesture will help reach very soon an agreement between Hamas and Israel through the mediation by Egypt, Qatar, and the United States. In conclusion, we would like to commend all efforts made to search for the missing persons in armed conflict all over the world. However, we are not convinced that the Security Council is the best venue for resolving these issues, especially in their historic context. I thank you.
I thank the representative of the Russian Federation for his statements. I now give the floor to the permanent representative of Guyana.
Thank you, Mr. President. I thank ASG Khiari for his insightful briefing and for the sobering assessment of the question of persons reported missing during armed conflict. I also thank Ms. Sung-Young Lee and Mr. Ruby Chen for sharing their testimonies as family members with loved ones who were abducted. We commiserate with you on having to endure these difficult experiences. Mr. President, one of the most difficult consequences of armed conflicts is the incidence of civilians and combatants alike who remain unaccounted for. Nearly 6 years ago, this Council recognized the increasing urgency of addressing this challenge and unanimously adopted Resolution 2474. Complementing this significant step, the Council adopted a presidential statement on missing persons last year, which was spearheaded by Algeria, Guyana, Sierra Leone, and Mozambique. While these products have added to the international legal framework on the issue of missing persons in armed conflict and enforced disappearances, the Council has an obligation to maintain its focus on this critical issue, since it remains an ever-present feature of armed conflicts. Mr. President, allow me to recall the Secretary General's 2024 report on the protection of civilians, in which we were informed that the International Committee of the Red Cross registered 40,000 new missing persons cases in 2023. This was the highest number of annual registrations recorded at that time. Sadly, the ICRC has said that this unprecedented rise continues, with the organization having registered 56,000 new cases in 2024, as was said before. It should be emphasized that these new cases are in addition to those pending from decades-old conflicts. In this context, Guyana continues to view Resolution 2474 as an important tool for international efforts to address the issue of missing persons. The resolution provides a set of critical guidelines that states can and should use to create holistic national frameworks for the prevention of disappearances, the identification of missing persons, as well as the creation of measures to actively search for and to return the remains of those recovered to their families. Critically, the resolution also calls on parties to an armed conflict to ensure access and to cooperate with the ICRC in addressing the issue of missing persons. We echo this call and express support for the efforts of the ICRC in the execution of their mandate. States are obligated to prioritize the safety of civilians and civilian infrastructure during armed conflict, which is the most effective step that can be taken to prevent incidents of missing persons.
Thank you, Mr. President, and thank you, Assistant Khiari and Ms. Ong Yuli, for your briefings. I also thank Mr. Ruby Chen for his powerful testimony. Ruby, I speak to you not as a diplomat, but as a father, as a husband, and as a human being. You should not have had to be here today. You should not have had to sit before the UN Security Council and explain how your son was murdered, how his body was taken, how you were left in the dark for months. But you did. You did it with dignity and with courage, with a strength no one should ever have to find. We will not rest until Itai is returned. This is our most sacred obligation, because bringing our sons home is who we are. Mr. President, also with us is Dr. Leah and Menachem Goldin, the mother and brother of Adar Goldin. Adar Goldin was murdered and kidnapped in 2014 during a ceasefire that was brokered by the UN and the US. That ceasefire was meant to allow for a humanitarian pause in the fighting. Instead, Hamas used it to ambush Adar, murder him, and steal his body. Almost 11 years have passed. 11 years of unanswered questions. 11 years of a family unable to bury their son. His mother, Leah, has become a shining light of courage and moral clarity. She has raised her voice when so many others stayed silent. She has become the conscience that the UN, this Council, and so many others in the international community have failed to find. When the international community failed to act, Leah refused to sit quietly. We thank her, and we repeat her call, bring Hadar home. Also with us in this chamber today are Ona and Ronen Nautra, the parents of Omer. Omer was 21-year-old Israeli-American and a proud son of Long Island, New York. He was killed on October 7 during Hamas's brutal attack. His body was also taken into Gaza, where it remains held by Hamas to this day. For over a year, Ona and Ronen lived in agonizing uncertainty, hoping their son was alive. Their tireless advocacy kept his story in the public eye. They have spoken of Omer's love of sports, especially soccer, basketball, and volleyball. Omer was a warm and caring young man who lit up any room he entered. Omer's story is a stark reminder of Hamas's vile tactics, denying families the basic dignity of mourning and burial. We stand with the Nozra family in their grief. Mr. President, before we speak of international law, we must speak of something more basic, more ancient, more human, the moral obligation to return the dead to their families. It is not a political principle. It is not a Western norm. It is a universal duty shared by every nation, rooted in every religion, in Christianity, Islam, and Judaism. All hold the burial ritual as sacred. It is engraved into the conscience of every human being to bury the dead, to mark their names, to let their families grieve in dignity, not only as Hamas violated that obligation in the sickest way, but it has built an industry out of it. They steal the bodies of the murdered and use them as bargaining chips. They parade them in the streets. They store them in tunnels. They use them to extort, to negotiate, to delay, to benefit. They do not treat the dead with respect. They treat them like inventory. To them, the remains of a murdered son or daughter are no different than cash in hand. Hamas has created an economy of death. Look at the videos from October 7th. They spent a lot of time and energy carrying bodies while they were fighting, but they were spending energy to abduct bodies into Gaza. It is a system, not an accident, a strategy, not a tragedy. However, so many in this council, so many righteous nations have said next to nothing. There are currently 58 hostages being held in Gaza, some alive, some murdered, all denied the rights, all denied access, all denied the dignity that should never be in question. Mr. President, as we heard today, this Council adopted Resolution 2474 in 2019. I was here when it happened. It called on all parties in armed conflict to account for missing persons, to return the remains of the dead, to provide information, to allow families to grieve, and to recognize that these acts are not gifts, they are simply human. Hamas has violated every letter of that resolution, repeatedly and openly. Where is the response? Where is the demand for compliance? Where is the basic moral outrage? Hamas's desecration of this resolution and the fundamental inhumanity represents is beyond words, and the international community looks away. This is not just a crime against Israel. It is a warning to the entire world. If this becomes the new normal, if the taking of bodies become an accepted and successful tactic, then no family, no soldier, no civilian will be safe from the same fate. Today it is us. We are dealing with it. Tomorrow it could be anyone. The battlefield will not end at death. It will follow the fallen into the grave. We ask this Council not for sympathy, but for action. We call on the Secretary General to fulfill his mandate under Resolution 2474 by including a dedicated section in his next report on the protection of civilians. That section must document the full extent of this ongoing atrocity. Every hostage still held by Hamas, every stolen body, every Israeli missing since October 7, and every fallen soldier whose remains have yet to be returned from past wars. We support Ruby's call to designate a special UN representative to promote and advocate for the return of deceased hostages, both our fallen heroes and all those deprived of peace around the world. The obligation to bring our people home does not fade with time. It endures until the mission is complete. Mr. President, as you know, in the ancient Greek tragedy of Antigone, a young woman defies the king's decree to bury her brother. She knows the price. She knows the consequences, but she chooses to act. In death, her brother is still her brother, and he deserves his dignity. That is a story thousands of years old. It is of a different language and a very different world. Still, it reflects the same universal truth we are asking this Council to remember today, that to withhold the right of burial is to violate something far deeper than law. It violates what makes us all human. In our own tradition, we have a similar story. When King Saul, the first king of Israel, fell in a battle, the enemy took his body and hung it on the walls of their city. But his followers risked their lives and traveled behind enemy lines to recover his body and give him a proper burial. They understood what even this council too often forgets, that how we treat the fallen defines who we are in life. Colleagues, the ancient Israelites did what was right, not because they were told to, but because their conscience demanded it. Antigone buried her brother because it was what justice demanded. Today, the state of Israel will continue to act with the same conviction. We will not forget our dead. We will not leave them behind. We will not allow Hamas to turn memory into a weapon. That is our duty, and it will be fulfilled. Thank you, Mr. President.
I thank the Permanent Representative of Israel for his statement. I give the floor to the representative of Iraq.
Thank you, Mr. President. The delegation of Iraq would like to express its thanks and appreciation to the efforts of Greece as president of the Council during the current month. We would also like to commend the delegation of France for their efforts as president last month. We also thank Mr. Khaled Khiari for his briefing today. We value the efforts of the Security Council to discuss this important and noble humanitarian issue, which is one of the outcomes of wars and international conflicts, even those that have lasted for a long time. We believe that the responsibility to search for missing persons is a collective humanitarian responsibility, where we need concerted national and international efforts through international humanitarian agencies and organizations working in this field in order to reach results that will lead to searching for, knowing the fate, and finding the remains of missing persons by creating an international humanitarian mechanism based on cooperation and technical assistance. We commend the Security Council for the many functions pursuant to its mandate as set out in the UN Charter. We also reaffirm the importance of addressing the root causes of conflicts in order to achieve sustainable peace and security through dialogue, consultations, and negotiations in order to resolve disputes and end conflicts. This is a joint, collective responsibility. International humanitarian organizations must address these issues. They must engage in these efforts, as this is a technical work in the field. Mr. President, Iraq, similar to other countries affected by conflicts and wars, has endured the increase in the number of missing Iraqi persons as a result of the senseless wars waged by the former dictatorial regime in Iraq. In addition to the war on terror in my country, Iraq continues to work tirelessly to know the fate of thousands of missing Iraqi victims as a result of the military operations that took place in the 1980s and 1990s. Mothers, daughters, and sons continue to wait to know the fate of their loved ones. We take this opportunity to emphasize that we value the efforts of the ICRC to search for missing persons through assistance and technical cooperation as the international agency with the most expertise and efficiency in this regard, in order to search for and assist in uncovering the fate of missing victims. Iraq believes in the good performance and the capacity of the ICRC, given the many tangible achievements it has in many places around the world. The ICRC continues to work with Iraqi teams on the ground. Iraq is working in a productive way with the ICRC, and we strongly support the efforts of other international agencies and organizations in order to uncover the fate of missing persons in line with the 1949 Geneva Conventions and pursuant to Security Council Resolution 2474 of 2019. Iraq recognizes the importance and priority of this issue. Therefore, we remain fully committed and stand ready to cooperate with the international community to find viable solutions in order to address its repercussions through known specialized international agencies that work with missing persons, including the United Nations. I thank you.
I thank the representative of Iraq for his statement. I give the floor to the permanent representative of Cyprus.
Mr. President, at the outset, I wish to thank the Greek presidency for organizing this meeting on an issue of profound humanitarian and moral significance, as well as the briefers for their compelling statements. Resolution 2474, historic in being the first Security Council resolution devoted solely to missing persons in armed conflict, underscores the critical importance of addressing this issue not only as a humanitarian obligation, but as a pillar of reconciliation, post-conflict recovery, and lasting peace. The plight of missing persons during armed conflict transcends borders, politics, and ideologies. Too often, the voices of those who vanish in the chaos of war and the anguish of their families are left unheard, their fates unaccounted for. Resolution 2474 aims to change that reality by reaffirming the centrality of international humanitarian law, particularly the obligations of parties to armed conflict to prevent disappearances, search for missing persons, and facilitate access to information. Resolutions, no matter how powerful in language, required concrete action, and challenges remain daunting. With the upsurge of conflicts around the world, the scale of enforced disappearance and missing persons is staggering. Lack of political will, restricted humanitarian access, and the use of disappearance as a tool of war are just some of the barriers posed in fulfilling the purpose of Resolution 2474. We must therefore reaffirm our commitment to its implementation by strengthening international cooperation, holding perpetrators accountable, centering on victims and their families, and investing in technology and data sharing. Mr. President, Cyprus is no stranger to the painful legacy of the missing persons, and is all too aware of the need to accelerate meaningful implementation of this Council's resolution. The situation in Cyprus is a decades-old humanitarian tragedy. As a result of intercommunal violence in the 1960s, and mainly the Turkish illegal military invasion of 1974, more than 2,000 persons, Greek Cypriots, Turkish Cypriots, and citizens of countries around this table went missing. The fate of many remains unknown to this day. The missing persons in Cyprus are both combatants and civilians, including elders, women, and children. International humanitarian law provides that parties to a conflict must take measures to account for persons reported missing because of armed conflict and provide their families with information on their fate. In the case of Cyprus, Turkey failed to take measures to prevent persons from going missing during its illegal invasion of the island, while to this day refuses to account for the missing, to investigate their disappearance, determine their fate without distinction, or provide their families with information concerning the circumstances of their death. Notably, it refuses to disclose relevant information from its military archives, to provide full and unfettered access to possible burial sites, and provide information concerning the relocation of remains of missing persons. The establishment of the Committee on Missing Persons, CMP, in 1981, under UN auspices, and with the cooperation of both communities of Cyprus, has been a critical step forward. To date, the CMP has exhumed, identified, and returned the remains of 1,054 individuals, giving answers to many families who had been left in the dark for decades. But the work is far from complete. Hundreds remain unaccounted for, and with each passing year, eyewitnesses pass away, memories fade, and evidence risks being lost forever. Beyond supporting the efforts of the CMP, the government of the Republic of Cyprus has also been implementing its own program of exhumations and identifications of remains of missing persons in the areas under its effective control since 1999. All information in the possession of the government have been submitted to the CMP. Mr. President, there is an urgent need for Turkey to adopt and sustain a proactive approach towards providing the CMP with all necessary information, assistance, and cooperation in order to locate and identify the missing by ensuring the immediate, unconditional, unhindered, and uninterrupted access to all areas in the occupied part of Cyprus, including military zones, and providing the CMP with all information in its possession, particularly from its military archives. Let us be clear. The passage of time must not be an exercise of excuse for inaction. On the contrary, it must spur greater urgency. The Security Council has long recognized the importance of resolving the issue of missing persons in Cyprus, referenced regularly in its relevant resolution, by reaffirming that its resolution is essential for building trust between the communities and advancing reconciliation. But trust cannot be built on silence. Reconciliation cannot be achieved while families are denied the right to know the fate of their loved ones. Resolution 2474 provides a powerful framework, but frameworks must be implemented by actions. Cyprus offers a test case, not only of our commitment to the resolution, but of our collective will to uphold the dignity of victims and to heal the wounds of conflict through truth and accountability. We urge this Council to continue calling for the full implementation of Resolution 2474 in Cyprus and elsewhere, and to recognize that resolving the fate of the missing is not only a legal obligation under international humanitarian law, but a moral imperative and a precondition for peace. Every name recovered, every person identified does not only give closure to the family, it reaffirms our common humanity. Resolution 2474 should not remain just a milestone, but it should become a living instrument of hope, healing, and accountability. I thank you.
Thank the representative of Cyprus for her statement. I give the floor to the representative of Kuwait.
Your Excellency, Permanent Representative of the Friendly Hellenic Republic at the UN, ladies and gentlemen, allow me to thank you, your friendly country, and the Permanent Mission of Greece to New York for your efforts to convene this meeting, which is held to follow up on the implementation of Resolution 2474 of 2019, which was tabled during the presidency of our country of the Council in June 2019. This resolution has introduced a unique humanitarian dimension that touches us all. It contributes to enhancing international efforts to address the file of missing persons in armed conflicts. I would also like to thank His Excellency Khaled Khiari, Assistant Secretary General for the Middle East, Asia and the Pacific in DPPA and DPO. I thank him for his briefing. Mr. President, Resolution 2474 of 2019 has been an important addition to the series of resolutions adopted under the protection of civilians by this august council. This resolution very clearly, very explicitly, and away from any political considerations and interests, has established a robust institutional and normative framework to protect civilians in armed conflicts. Today, we are following up on the implementation of this resolution at a critical time, as at the international and regional levels, we're witnessing bitter conflicts that do not respect the humanity of people, do not respect international resolutions or international law. The confrontations on the ground are based on inhumane intellectual arrogance. As these confrontations expand, they threaten international peace and security. This is why it is necessary today in this august council to reaffirm the need to abide by this resolution. Mr. President, today's conflicts and yesterday's conflicts, due to the prevalence of selfish decisions, affected untold numbers of civilians. Among them, those who went missing as a result of armed conflicts. Wars, armed conflicts have tragic repercussions on the lives of civilians in general. No war is waged, Mr. President, and no regional or international conflict erupts without missing persons being the primary victims. They're lost in the darkness, and the hearts of their families oscillate between hope and despair. Against this background, abiding by humanitarian and legal practices is not merely a duty, it is a bridge that carries the concerned parties over to a common negotiating ground that builds trust and lays the foundation for dialogue, providing information, uncovering the fate of the missing persons, reuniting them with their families, and treating their remains in a dignified manner according to humanitarian standards. It's not only a moral duty, it is the foundation for preventing impunity to hold those responsible accountable. When we all abide by international humanitarian law, the impact of conflicts transforms into a framework for achieving peace. The Kuwaiti experience in this regard is very telling. We have endured immense suffering in the beginning of the 20th century. This bitter experience and the humanitarian dimensions of this experience has affected every home in the Kuwait, every family, whether Kuwaiti family or family of residents. I must shed some light on this experience and the humanitarian dimension of this experience 35 years on. It is a deep wound that has not yet healed for Kuwait. Field-based efforts continue to be made to search for the remains of 308 missing persons. In reality, Mr. President, this bitter experience shattered families, separating those who are missing from their children and their parents. But we are believers, and we believe, as we believed 6 years ago when the Security Council adopted unanimously Resolution 2474, we believe that no one on this earth is left to be forgotten. The missing are not forgotten. We hope for search efforts to continue under the umbrella of the UN and particularly the Security Council. We reaffirm our position on this purely humanitarian file. To ensure more progress on the ground, we believe a high-level UN official needs to be designated to be exclusively responsible for following up on the expanded process of identifying the remains of all missing persons. The periodic reporting mechanism of the SG should also continue. We reaffirm the need for Security Council members to play their role. They must stress the need for all concerned parties to abide by Resolution 2474 since the very first moments of the outbreak of any conflict, whether a civil conflict or a regional conflict, as this resolution provides a roadmap that aims to alleviate the suffering of the families and the missing persons and heal their wounds. Against this background, we call upon all the representatives of the Secretary General and peacekeeping missions operating on the ground to commit to the implementation of this resolution. They must include in their reports and briefings before your August Council sufficient information in the different stages of the conflict. This is of paramount importance to reassure the families of missing persons and to facilitate their reunification. This would accelerate peace negotiations, peace settlements, transitional justice processes, reconciliation, peace building, and sustaining peace, and also preventing impunity. Mr. President, in conclusion, I commend you and your friendly country and your permanent mission for holding this meeting. And I thank the ASG for the Middle East, Asia, and the Pacific in DPPA and DPO. I thank him for his briefing. We wish you all success in your efforts to defend the right to decent life and the right of every family to know the fate of their sons and daughters, whether living or deceased. I thank you, Mr. President.
I thank the representative of Kuwait for his statement. I give the floor to the representative of Turkey.
Mr. President, allow me to begin by thanking you and the briefers. At a time when civilians bear the brunt of armed conflicts around the globe, Turkey remains deeply committed to strengthening international efforts to protect civilians and address the tragic issue of missing persons. Addressing the plight of missing persons is not only a moral imperative, but also essential for achieving lasting peace and stability. International community bears a shared responsibility to uphold the rights of families to know the fate of their missing loved ones. United Nations plays a pivotal role in promoting effective mechanisms for the search, identification, and return of missing persons in accordance with the international humanitarian law and human rights law. The issue demands a comprehensive and coordinated approach. Turkey consistently advocates for depoliticized, impartial, and result-oriented efforts to address this challenge with full respect to the international law. We believe that effective cooperation, transparency, exchange of information are key to resolving cases of missing persons. Mr. President, the issue of missing persons remains one of the most tragic and pressing humanitarian consequences of the Syrian conflict. Tens of thousands of Syrians, maybe more, are still unaccounted for, causing unbearable suffering for countless families who seek truth and justice. We welcome the efforts of the new Syrian administration to address this critical issue. Recent announcement by Minister Sheybani during his address to this council on April 25th regarding the establishment of a national commission on missing persons is a step in the right direction. We sincerely hope that this commission will operate transparently, independently, and in close cooperation with international mechanisms, including the UN Independent Institution of Missing Persons, IIMP. Addressing the fate of missing persons is not only a humanitarian imperative. Mr. President, the situation in Gaza has descended into an unparalleled humanitarian crisis, with the protection of civilians having all but collapsed. Nearly the entire population of Gaza has been displaced. Thousands of people, mostly women and children, have been killed, injured, and many remained buried beneath the rubble. The continued blockade on humanitarian aid since March has resulted in acute food shortages and imminent catastrophic hunger. We should remind Israel of its obligations under international law and international humanitarian law, including UN Security Council Resolution 2474, and call for full compliance and accountability. We welcome the release of Edan Alexander earlier this week and reiterate our call for an immediate and sustained ceasefire and the release of hostages and detainees in line with the UN resolutions and full implementation of the agreement which entered into force on January 19, brokered by Egypt, Qatar, and the United States. This remains the viable only path to ensure the delivery of humanitarian aid to Gaza, secure the release of all remaining hostages and detainees, and uphold the principles of international law. Mr. President, The fate of missing persons in Cyprus cannot be taken up in a vacuum, nor can it be addressed without considering the historical circumstances that led to this tragedy. The issue dates back to 1963, and it is a humanitarian matter affecting both Turkish Cypriot and Greek Cypriot sides. It should not be politicized, nor should it be presented as an issue which only affects Greek Cypriots. There are a considerable number of Turkish Cypriots who have gone missing during the period 1963 to 1974, whose whereabouts are still unknown today. It should be underscored that majority of the Turkish Cypriot missing persons since 1963 have proven to be civilians, whereas the majority of the Greek Cypriot missing persons have been military personnel. Turkey, as a guarantor in Cyprus, has given strong political and financial support to the work of the Committee on Missing Persons in Cyprus, CMP, since its inception in 1981. This committee has access to military zones in the Turkish Republic of Northern Cyprus. It is considered one of the most successful committees in this field and has been operating efficiently and continues to deliver successful results. We believe the work of the committee should continue on its own merits with the collaboration of the two sides on the island. Mr. President, the baseless allegations by the representative of the Greek Cypriot administration, who portrayed a selective and one-sided interpretation of history and the present state of affairs, shall be responded indeed by their very counterpart, namely the Office of the Representative of the Turkish Republic of Northern Cyprus, whose voice unfortunately cannot be heard at this platform today, despite their request to attend this meeting. Turkish Cypriot side is one of the two parties to this Committee on Missing Persons, which operates under the auspices of the UN. Their absence here, while the other party is being represented, is both unfair and unacceptable. Turkish Cypriot people, co-founders of the 1960 partnership states, were forced out of the government institutions and legislative and judicial organs of Cyprus in 1963, a decade before the Turkish intervention. Atrocities against Turkish Cypriots are well documented in UN archives. Consequently, UNSC was deployed on the island in 1964. That alone attests to the fact that Cyprus problem did not begin in 1974, but a decade earlier. During the following decade, 180,000 Turkish Cypriots has been displaced multiple times and forced to live in scattered enclaves. Greek Cypriot representatives have long been disinforming the international community by portraying the Cyprus problem as one of invasion and occupation, referring to the legitimate and justified Turkish intervention on the island, carried out in accordance with the Treaty of Guarantee, only upon the coup d'etat which declared annexation of the island to the Greece. In closing, Mr. President, Turkey affirms its unwavering commitment to the protection of civilians in armed conflict and calls for stronger international cooperation to address the plight of missing persons, uphold humanitarian principles, and ensure accountability. Mr. President, I had a conversation with the international members, non-Greek, no Turkish members of this committee. They are happy about the cooperation by Turkey and Turkish Cypriot side. For your information, thank you.
I thank the representative of Turkey for his statement. I shall now make a further statement in my capacity as representative of Greece, and I kindly ask member states participating under Rule 37, when they refer to other member states, to refer to them with a constitutional name in the United Nations. I resume my function as President of the Council. There are no more names inscribed on the list of speakers. The meeting is adjourned.